Arthur's world had been scoured clean of softness, its colors bleached by a grief so vast it had become the sky itself. He stood on the porch of the small ranch house, a sentinel guarding a tomb, and watched the wagon deposit its cargo. She was not what he had been told to expect. The broker in town had described a woman, young enough, strong enough. The figure that stepped onto the hard-packed earth was small, her back stooped with the weight of years he hadn't paid for, her face a roadmap of hardships he had no interest in reading. Mai. The name was a foreign sound in the ceaseless wind. He had traded 3 of his best horses and a signed deed for a debt his father had left like a curse. In return, he received this woman, 30 years his senior, to cook and clean and mend the unraveling edges of his life. He grunted a single word, inside, the sound rusty from disuse, and turned his back, not waiting to see if she followed. He did not want a wife, he wanted a function, a pair of hands to manage the hollow spaces his first wife, Mary, had left behind. He wanted a ghost to fight the ghosts already living in his house. Her silence was different from his. His was a cavern, empty and echoing. Hers was a deep well, and he refused to look into it, terrified of what he might see reflected there. Mai moved through the house with the quiet efficiency of a shadow. Her hands, though wrinkled and worn, were never still. They took the grime from the windows, letting in a pale, reluctant light. They scrubbed the floors until the wood grain reappeared like a forgotten memory. They kneaded dough on a floured board, and soon the scent of baking bread, a scent Arthur hadn't known since Mary was alive, began to push back against the stale air of sorrow. He watched her from a distance, his heart a tight, cold knot in his chest. He expected her to break, to complain about the cold, the work, the crushing loneliness of the prairie. But she said nothing. She simply worked. She found a rip in his winter coat, the one he'd worn for 5 years, and mended it with stitches so fine they were nearly invisible. She took the thin, grey stew he would have made and transformed it with wild herbs she'd gathered from the plains, creating something that tasted of the earth, something that tasted of life. He ate it without comment, the warmth spreading through him an unwelcome intrusion. Each competent, gentle act was a quiet rebellion against the desolation he had so carefully cultivated. He felt the ice of his grief beginning to crack, and it terrified him. He wanted the numbness. He did not want to feel this slow, persistent thawing. His daughter, Lily, was a 6-year-old whisper, a small ghost herself who haunted the edges of his vision. She had barely spoken since her mother's passing, her laughter buried under the same earth. At first, she hid from Mai, a frightened sparrow peering from behind door frames. Mai never pushed. She would simply leave a small bowl of sweet rice porridge on the table or hum a tune so soft it was almost part of the wind song. One afternoon, Arthur saw Mai sitting on the porch steps, a small block of wood and a whittling knife in her hands. Over the course of an hour, a bird, delicate and impossibly detailed, emerged from the wood. She set it on the railing and went inside. Lily, thinking no one was watching, crept out. She picked up the wooden bird, her small fingers tracing its wings. She clutched it to her chest. The next day, as Mai was hanging laundry, Lily approached her for the first time. She held out the bird. "Does it have a name?" she asked, her voice a fragile thread. Mai looked down at the child, her eyes softening. "He waits for you to give him one," she replied gently. Later that evening, Arthur heard a sound he thought he'd lost forever. It was the faint, hesitant murmur of Lily, talking to the wooden bird in a corner of the main room. It was the first crack in the dam of silence. The small garden behind the house had been Mary's pride. Now it was a tangle of thorns and weeds, a monument to Arthur's neglect. It was the one place he could not bear to look, for he saw his own failure written in its decay. One morning, he saw Mai standing at its edge, her gaze thoughtful. He expected her to turn away. To his fury, she returned with a spade and a pair of thick gloves. He stormed out onto the porch, the word "don't" at a rock in his throat. But it wouldn't come out. He watched as she began to work, her movements patient and methodical. She was not ripping the weeds out with violence, but carefully, almost reverently, clearing the earth. She was not destroying what was left of Mary, she was searching for it. Over days, she unearthed the hardy perennials that had survived, coaxing them back to light. She wasn't planting a new garden, she was tending an old one. She was listening to the soil's memory. Arthur found himself watching her for hours, the anger in his chest slowly dissolving into a strange, aching confusion. This woman, who he saw as an intruder, was showing more respect for his past than he had. She was honoring the ghost he had tried to lock away, and in doing so, she was proving that life, however dormant, still stubbornly wished to grow. The sky turned the color of a bruise first, a low, ominous purple that swallowed the horizon. The wind, once a constant whisper, began to shriek, hurling handfuls of dirt and ice against the windows. The blizzard descended not as a gentle blanket of snow, but as a roaring white beast, erasing the world outside their door. They were trapped. The ranch became a tiny, fragile island in a howling sea of white. The cold seeped through the walls, a physical presence that stole the breath. Arthur worked methodically, checking the livestock in the barn, securing the shutters, his movements grim and practical. Inside, Mai kept the fire fed, its small orange heart a defiant glow against the oppressive gloom. The silence between them changed. It was no longer the empty silence of distance, but the charged silence of shared confinement. Every creak of the house, every roar of the wind, was a sound they heard together. They moved around each other in the small space, a careful, unspoken dance of necessity. He would bring in more wood, his shoulders covered in snow, and she would have a tin mug of hot, bitter tea waiting for him. No words were exchanged, but a new language was being forged in the heart of the storm, a language of gesture, of shared vulnerability, of two solitary souls weathering the same tempest under a single, groaning roof. On the second night of the storm, the beast outside found its way in. It came for Lily. It started as a cough, a dry little bark that echoed in the wind-haunted quiet. By morning, her face was flushed with fever, her breathing a shallow, ragged sound. Arthur touched her forehead and a primal fear, cold and sharp, pierced through his hardened shell. It was the same fever that had taken Mary. The same useless panic rose in his throat, choking him. He was a capable man, a man who could tame horses and face down wolves, but against this invisible enemy, he was helpless, just as he had been before. The storm made getting to a doctor in town an impossibility. They were alone with the sickness, and Arthur felt the walls of his carefully constructed emptiness begin to cave in, crushed by the weight of a grief he was being forced to live through all over again. He paced the floor, his fists clenched, a prisoner of his own home and his own history. He watched Mai place a cool, damp cloth on Lily's brow and felt a surge of raw, irrational anger. She did not belong here. This was not her sorrow. This was not her child to lose. He finally cornered her by the hearth, his voice a low, ragged growl. "What do you think you're doing?" "You know nothing." Mai did not flinch. She was crushing dried leaves in a small bowl, her movements precise and calm amidst his storm of panic. She continued her work, adding a trickle of hot water, the steam carrying a strange, pungent aroma. "Stop it," he snarled, grabbing her wrist. "Whatever witchery this is, stop it." For the first time, she met his gaze directly, and the deep, bottomless sorrow in her eyes stopped the breath in his lungs. Her voice, when she spoke, was not loud, but it filled the entire room, silencing the wind itself. "I buried a son in the rice fields of Guangdong," she said, her words stark and unadorned. "I buried a husband on the ship that brought me here. I know what it is to watch a world die." She gently pulled her wrist from his grasp and looked from the child on the bed to his tormented face. "But a child," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, "a child is a new world. And you do not let a world die if you can save it." Arthur froze, the words striking him with the force of a physical blow. In that single, shattering moment, he saw not a transaction, not an old, foreign woman, but a soul who had walked through the same fire that had forged his own heart into ash. For 2 days and 2 nights, Mai did not sleep. She sat by Lily's bed, spooning the herbal broth into her mouth, bathing her feverish skin, and humming her low, foreign lullabies. Arthur watched, a silent, helpless observer. His anger was gone, replaced by a fragile, terrifying hope. He saw the deep exhaustion in Mai's face, the slight tremor in her hands, and understood she was fighting this battle with a piece of her own spirit. On the third morning, the wind died. An eerie silence fell over the plains. And in that silence, Lily opened her eyes. The fever was gone. Her first word was a weak, thirsty whisper for water. As Arthur held the cup to his daughter's lips, he looked over at Mai, who was slumped in the chair, finally asleep. Sunlight, brilliant and white off the new snow, streamed through the window, illuminating her face. He saw not her age, but her strength. He saw not a stranger, but a savior. He went to the old wooden chest at the foot of his bed and took out a heavy wool shawl. It was Mary's. He had kept it sealed away, a sacred relic. He walked over and gently draped it over Mai's sleeping form. It was not a gesture of replacement. It was a gesture of warmth, of gratitude, of profound, world-altering respect. The thaw had finally reached his heart. When the snows had melted enough for travel, they rode into town for supplies. The journey was different. The silence in the wagon was no longer a chasm between them, but a shared space. In town, the stares were immediate and hostile. Whispers followed them like flies. As Arthur was negotiating for grain, Mr. Henderson, the smug town broker who had arranged their marriage, approached Mai. "Well now," he sneered, looking her up and down. "Still earning your keep, are you?" "I told Arthur you were a hardy 1 inch." Mai flinched, pulling the shawl tighter around herself, her face a mask of quiet dignity. In the past, Arthur would have ignored it, would have finished his business and pretended not to hear, eager to escape the judgment. But something had fundamentally shifted within him. He turned from the store owner, his face like granite. He walked deliberately to Mai's side and placed a firm, protective hand on her shoulder. He looked Henderson dead in the eye, his voice low and cold and carrying across the dusty street. "You will address my wife," he said, the words clear and deliberate. With respect, the broker's jaw dropped. The whispers on the street died. In that moment, Arthur had not just defended her, he had claimed her. He had made a public declaration of a private truth, cementing a bond that was no longer about a debt or a transaction, but about honor. Spring came to the prairie like a promise fulfilled. The harsh, grey landscape blushed with the green of new life, and the air grew soft. The garden behind the house, the one Mai had so patiently tended, was now a riot of color. Mary's perennials bloomed alongside new, unfamiliar flowers grown from seeds Mai had carried in a small silk pouch all the way from her homeland. The two worlds were not fighting for space, but growing together, their roots intertwined in the same rich earth. One evening, Arthur sat on the porch, watching Lily chase butterflies near the garden, her laughter a sound that was now as natural as the birdsong. Mai sat beside him in her rocking chair, mending one of Lily's dresses. No words passed between them, for none were needed. The silence was a comfortable blanket woven from shared trials and quiet understanding. He looked at her hands, no longer just seeing their age, but seeing the hands that had mended his coat, that had kneaded his bread, that had saved his child. He reached over, his own calloused, scarred hand covering hers, stilling her needle. She looked up, and in her eyes, he saw not a past of sorrow, but a future of peace. He had paid for a housekeeper, a function, a ghost. But in the heart of the desolate wilderness, he had found a home. He had found his wife. So what can we learn from Arthur and Mai's story? It teaches us that the deepest connections are often forged in the most unexpected circumstances, proving that love isn't about age, or origin, or the terms of an agreement, but about recognizing the shared humanity in another soul. It's a powerful reminder that even the most frozen hearts can thaw with patience, and that true strength is found not in building walls, but in the courage to let them down and tend to the gardens of the past. It shows that sometimes, the family we end up with is the one we build from broken pieces, creating something stronger and more beautiful than we could have ever imagined. If this story of quiet love and profound healing touched your heart, please show your support by liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more emotional and inspirational stories that explore the depths of the human spirit. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you never miss a new video. Thank you for watching.